Chip Namias' life, if it was turned into a movie, which I think it could be one day, would be every sports fan's dream to play the lead role as him, as the actor. He has had a storied, decorated career in sports media. He currently is the president of Athlete and Event Sports Public Relations, which is where he does public relations, broadcasting, community affairs, a lot more with some of the best names in sports, in media, and entertainment. He was the youngest PR director of the NFL when he was 26 years old, taking over for the Dolphins as their PR head. I could keep going, and his resume would be like reciting an anthology. It would be like going through a commencement speech at a major university. We would be going through one accolade after another. But Chip, I'm Bryan Fenley. I'm an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. Excited to feature you here. And I know you've worked a lot in the movie sector as well. So I want to start there. What was it like with working on the movie Longest Yard, teaching Adam Sandler how to actually throw a football?
Well, I didn't actually do that. I handled the PR for the movie, but Adam is a great athlete and he's a wonderful basketball player, as you may know. But I'll tell you a funny story about The Longest Yard was the first movie I ever worked on. And my very first day on the set, I'd been hired by the producer, a guy named Jack Garaputo, who's Adam Sandler's partner at Happy Madison. And I was on the set. And if you remember, they were filming that movie, and Chris Berman was playing the play-by-play announcer who was announcing the game between the guard and the prisoners. And there's a scene in there where the prisoners pull off what was the old Fumblerooski play that was made famous by Nebraska in a bowl game back in the 70s or 80s. And so here I've just arrived on the set. I've just within 10 minutes met the guy who's hired me, the producer. He's introduced me to the director, and they start action on filming the scene. And Chris Berman is doing the play-by-play, and he says, and it's the old Fumblerooski play popularized by Oklahoma, blah, 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 blah. And then, they finish the scene, they go, cut. All right, moving on to the next scene. And I realized there's a mistake here. It was not the Fumblerooski was not popularized by Oklahoma. It was Nebraska. And so I'm thinking, I just got here. I'm the new guy. I've been on a movie set 10 minutes of my life. Do I say something? So I thought, all right. So I go over and I tap the producer on the shoulder. He's sitting in the chair with his name on the back. And I said, Jack, the Fumblerooski was Nebraska. It was not Oklahoma. And he kind of like waves me off, and I just kind of like back away and I go, all right, I guess I overstepped my bounds here. And then about 2 minutes later on the bullhorn, they go, all right, we're going to go back and shoot that scene again. Chris, this time it's Nebraska, not Oklahoma. And I thought, save the movie.
What was Chris's reaction when he thought he had nailed the line and then he had to go over and do it again?
I talked to him about it afterwards, and he knew that it was a mistake, but he just figured they had a reason for it. And I just figured they don't know sports and somebody better step in.
What is the character trait that you exuded when you were young that was sort of like a foreshadowing that you would one day be good at PR, that you would be good at promoting, working in entertainment, working in sports?
Well, growing up, my two biggest interests were journalism and sports and the media. And I was fascinated with both of those things. So I thought, I ended up going to the University of Florida, which at the time had one of only 3 schools in the country where you could get a degree, not just a major, a degree in PR. So I went to Florida. While I was a student there, I worked as an intern in the sports information office. I wrote sports for the school paper, but I was never really intending on doing that as a career because my parents had kind of rammed it into my head that I was going to go to law school, that I was good at talking people into things, and that was my future. So, I graduated from college, degree in PR, and 3 years experience working in the Florida Sports Information Office. And I was back in Memphis killing the summer until law school started, trying to get a job for the summer at a department store or something. And I saw that Memphis had just been awarded an expansion franchise in the North American Soccer League that you're too young to remember, but it was a really big league in this country, way bigger than MLS is now. And I cold called the PR director and said, I just graduated. He said, come down to my office. and he hired me as a summer intern for $2 an hour. And at the end of the summer, they offered me a full-time job. So I told my parents I was not going to go to law school. And about 9 days before it was supposed to start, I scrapped it.
Wow. By the way, I love that you have the connection to Memphis. I lived there for 3 years and will always very much remember fondly of my time there. So the thing that you said you were good at was, convincing people to look your way. So ultimately dealing with the pushback that might have come from your parents, how did you ultimately say that, look, this is the way I'm going. I have a route and let me find my own path because I know where I'm going now?
Well, I think they knew about, my parents were divorced when I was 3, and I think they each individually knew of my love for media and journalism and sports. And, initially I think I couched it that I was going to defer my law school for a year and see if this works. And of course, one year became 40 something.
Yes. And when you eventually continued on with this career, you were 26, you were with the Miami Dolphins. And there's a story that I wanted to ask you about where Don Shula, you introduced him to the actor Don Johnson, who obviously
Yeah.
was with Vice. What happened in that conversation that was funny that transpired from that?
Well, first, working with Coach Shula is still the highlight of my career. All these years later, to work with a guy who inarguably is a legend. But when I first got that job, as you mentioned, I was the youngest PR director ever in the NFL, and I was green as grass. And here's Don Shula, the Don Shula with the famous jaw and the Super Bowl championships, the undefeated season, and he's an intimidating guy. And so anyway, what you're referring to is in the 80s, right at the height of, at a time, Miami Vice was the biggest thing there was, not just in television, crossed over to all forms of media. It set fashion trends, music trends. It was huge. And so Don Johnson, who was one of the stars of the show, had become friendly with our equipment manager. And our equipment manager had had a cameo in a Miami Vice episode. And he invited Don to come out to a game. And Don Johnson told our equipment guy, I'd love to meet Coach Shula. And so the equipment guy asked me, hey, after the game, could you set it up in the locker room? And I said, if we win, yes. If we lose, there's no way I'm asking Coach Shula to do that. But we win the game. So Coach Shula's in the locker room. Don Johnson's in there. Coach Shula finishes his post-game media obligations. And so I said, Coach, there's a guy I want to take you over here to meet. And I walk him over. The locker room's crowded. The players are in there. It's pretty hectic. And I bring, Don Johnson and Don Shula together. And I said, Coach, this is Don Johnson from Miami Vice. And Coach Shula pumps his hand and he says, you guys do a hell of a job. He's patting him on the back. You guys do a hell of a job. And I realized at that moment, Coach Shula, who is famously unaware of anything pop culture-ish, knows nothing but football, family, and God. And Coach Shula thinks that Don Johnson is a real Miami Vice police officer. And he's saying, you guys do a hell of a job. And Don Johnson says, Coach, I want to invite you to come out and watch us shoot sometime. And Coach goes, oh, no, that's too dangerous for me. And I'm like, oh, it struck home that Coach had no idea who he was.
How long until he realized that it was actually a show?
Never.
Did you let him know right away afterwards?
No, it would have been too awkward. And I didn't let him know right afterwards either because he wouldn't have liked that. So we just kind of let it go. And it was not unusual. We had another incident where one of our players was very good friends with the comedy team, Cheech and Chong. We had them out at practice one day. And the player asked me, could you make sure that Coach Shula meets Cheech and Chong after practice? I said, sure. So he finishes his stuff on the field, and Cheech and Chong were about 20 yards away. And as we're walking over, I said, Coach, I'm going to introduce you to those two guys, that Cheech and Chong, their famous comedy team. And he stops dead in his tracks and he looks at me, he goes, you mean like Burns and Allen, which was a comedy team from the 1930s? I said, yeah, they're just like that. That's exactly what they are. And not a big pop culture guy, but it was pretty funny looking back on it.
I saw one sports writer, he described meeting you, and this was when you were the media director for the Houston Oilers. And for those of the listeners who are watching this via video, you can see the Houston Oilers helmet behind you. But he described the sports writer, quote, Namias commanded the press box at the Astrodome like Sinatra at the Sands Hotel. What is he getting at with that metaphor?
um, that I was bossy in the press box. I don't know. I think I know the quote you're referring to, and he used to tease me that when they would serve the meal at halftime, he'd say nobody gets a piece of fried chicken until Chip says it's okay. And
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if that was true, but that sounds like somebody that I paid to write that.
What is the worst PR mistake you have seen one of your contemporaries have?
Boy, um, you know, I don't know if I could. I probably would. I can't think of one right now, and I probably wouldn't want to single
Sure.
somebody out. But the thing that as a PR guy that is kind of a bugaboo for me is, is the art of the athlete or the coach apology. When somebody feels like they're going to have to apologize, I can't stand the apology when the athlete or the coach says, if I've offended anybody, I apologize. Or if anybody didn't like what I said, no, that's not the way you apologize. That's not a mea culpa full apology. If you're going to apologize, make it across the board. Don't make it a mealy mouth, half-assed apology. Go all the way. And I'm always amazed that athletes stumble over the bad apology.
What is the most convincing you've had to do to get an athlete or a coach or somebody in entertainment, sports media to do an interview when they didn't want to, they ended up doing it and they actually really enjoyed the experience?
Well, when you're working as the PR guy for a football team, that's almost an everyday occurrence because, in the NFL, when I worked in it, and still to this day, there's a finite amount of time every day that the locker room is open to the media, well, pre-COVID, for interviews. And, what a lot of athletes do in team situations is during that time, they make themselves scarce and go into the training room and hide until the time is over. And you've got to go in there every day and coax them. But there's one time when I remember when I was with the Oilers and Warren Moon, our Hall of Fame quarterback, broke a bone in his shoulder and he was going to be out for a while. And a guy named Cody Carlson was his backup, and he was going to be elevated to the high-profile starting quarterback. And Cody was kind of a reticent, shy guy. And we were in Indianapolis where Warren got hurt, and Cody snuck out the back door of our locker room and made his way to the team bus because he didn't want to, address to the media that he was now the starting quarterback of the Houston Oilers. And I had to, go on the bus, sit in the chair next to the seat next to him on the bus, and spend about 25 minutes telling him why he needed to come out and talk. And a lot of times with players, when they don't want to talk, especially after games, if they've had a blunder or something that maybe didn't go their way and they don't want to talk, when you have to explain that when they do that, it's not just something you're saying. They really are going to make it worse because they're going to take what will be a one-day story. Maybe a guy dropped a key pass that would have been the winning touchdown, and he doesn't want to talk. So if he doesn't talk, that's going to become a two-day story or maybe a 3-day story, because until he addresses it, maybe during the week, 2-3 days after the game, because they're going to keep badgering him to talk about it. It's just going to continue to be in the paper for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Bryan Fenley still refuses to talk or still not available. So talk, get your side out, get it over, move on, take a 3-day story, make it a 1-day story, and let's have it be over with.
Yeah, getting in front of the story is certainly the way to go. We're joined by Chip Namias, PR executive. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. Speaking about the NFL, how did you become a replay official?
Yeah, so when I stopped my last year working as a PR guy in the league, I was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 1997. And I left there and started my own business. And as I was leaving, that coincided with the year the NFL was bringing back replay. They had experimented with it years before that, but it had gone away, and now they were going to bring it back. So they were looking for people that they had relationships with to possibly be, to work in replay as they were assembling officials to work in this new thing that they were just bringing back. So they asked me if I'd be interested in traveling around to games every week as a replay official. I really didn't want to do that. I've been traveling around for years with NFL teams. So I said, yeah, I don't think I want to get on an airplane every week. So they said, well, at the time the Chargers were in San Diego, and they said, how about if you just go to Charger games and an occasional Arizona Cardinal game? Both of those you can drive to. And I said, absolutely, that would be great. So, did that for about 20 years. And it was a lot of fun because it allowed me to kind of continue to be involved, no longer working for a team. But once you're in a sport like that, it kind of gets in your blood, and it's almost like a drug that you need to have. So even though I was no longer working for a team and I was independent, I was still in stadium press boxes every Sunday. I was, able to, keep my contacts going, see the coaches, the players, the broadcasters, the writers. You talked about earlier what's one of my strengths or that allowed me to get into PR, and I would say schmoozing.
Yes.
Not all younger people know the word schmooze, but schmoozing is really what's allowed me to have a career. If I had been, more of a shy or, person who didn't want to kind of get out there and handshake, I probably never would have been able to have my career. But I was always very conscious of making contacts, maintaining those contacts. I'm very strong on that. One of the things that I feel strongly about it in these days of social media is I think within the media and PR, a lot of people have kind of gotten away from the art of the personal contact. They'll send an email or hey, follow me on social media. And that's all great, but it's still, even in 2021, it doesn't replace actual personal relationships. If you have a personal relationship, and I'll give you a great example. The NFL used to be very famous for their personal relationships and the way they would cultivate the media. And I remember there was I won't mention what it was, but there was a significant, well-known PR issue that the NFL was confronted with not too long ago. And, it probably spun a little bit out of control. And somebody at the NFL told me, he said, if this was 20 years ago, we would have been able to extinguish this story because we would have just gone to the relationships we had with the important media in pro football and work with them and got the story and been able to spin it. But now we don't spend enough time on personal relationships anymore. And it's not something that we could control. So, when you need somebody or you need something or you need to talk to somebody about something that's going on in your world that you got to control, you can't put a price tag on having an actual personal relationship with that person, not an email or social media. They're one of my followers, an actual personal relationship.
No one works a room better than Chip Namias. He joins us. You are not a wallflower, not even close. You might have helmets on your wall or next to your wall, but you're definitely not a wallflower. I'm Bryan Fenley. And speaking of these relationships, what is the most extravagant dinner party you've been a part of where you've gotten to work with and meet and have conversations with some of the elites in entertainment and sports media, and a fascinating conversation that you had in one of those get-togethers?
I would say probably two things. When I worked on that movie, The Longest Yard, and again, that was the first movie I ever worked on. I can't remember what the circumstance was, but it was the end of the day, and I found myself in a hotel room that had been converted to kind of a green room. And the only people in there were me, Burt Reynolds, and Chris Rock.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that was pretty fascinating. And just sit there for an hour and just have a one-on-one or one-on-two conversation with Burt Reynolds and Chris Rock, or being able to go to dinner with Adam Sandler and some other people. When I worked on the movie $1 Million Arm, which John Hamm was one of the stars in, we cast about 5 or 6 real to have cameos in the movie. And the night before they shot their scene, John wanted to he was a huge baseball fan, grew up in St. Louis as a crazy Cardinal fan. So, John Hamm and these 5 baseball writers and myself went out to dinner in Atlanta and just talked baseball for 3 hours. But then there's sometimes where you end up feeling a little foolish. I was, again, another longest yard story. The rapper Nelly was in that movie. And at that time, and probably still now, rap was not something that I knew a lot about. So I was in the producer's trailer on the set of Longest Yard when Nelly walked in, and they introduced me here. This is Nelly, and I had, okay. I shook his hand, and the producer said, "Oh, I forgot something. I got to go hang out with Nelly for a minute. I'll be right back." So he leaves, and I end up being in the trailer with Nelly for a half hour, and we're talking. He's telling me about he's going to go sing the national anthem for a St. Louis Cardinals World Series game, and I'm thinking, this guy's delusional. This is just some guy working on the set of the movie, and he thinks he's singing the national anthem. And we have a great conversation about baseball and talking about the World Series. Wow. And then later that day, somebody at the studio said, "I heard you had a great visit with Nelly." And I'm going, "That guy who works on the movie set?" And they go, you don't know who that is, do you?" And I go, "No." And they said, "Arguably the biggest singer in music today." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And when I told my nieces, who at the time were like 12 and 14, that I met Nelly, they didn't know whether to be impressed or humiliated that their uncle had no idea who he was.
Well, you were telling this story earlier about how you brought Don Shula into a conversation in meeting with Don Johnson of Miami Vice, where you said that Shula didn't know a lot about pop culture. Well, maybe it's sort of you're channeling your inner Don Shula, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you look back at your career, what is the Picasso-like parallel to your work in an individual project that you've been a part of?
You know, the most challenging, the 1993 season when I was with the Houston Oilers, it was challenging and difficult, but I'm very proud of how we came out of that season. We had 3 huge national bad PR things that happened during that season, like within 5 weeks of each other. It was really unprecedented. We had a player during the season be in an auto accident in which his best friend was killed, in which he was so distraught that he had been driving and his best friend had been killed with him behind the wheel. This was late at night. He took out a shotgun out of his trunk of his car and killed himself at the scene. So we had that happen, which was horrible. Then we had on national television on an ESPN Sunday night game with the cameras trained on them, our defensive coordinator punched our offensive coordinator in the face. Kevin Gilbride, our offensive coordinator, the famous Buddy Ryan, our defensive coordinator, that became a huge story. And then we had a player who elected to not, his wife was giving birth to a baby on a Saturday. And the team was in the middle of a losing streak and playing a road game at New England. And the player got permission to not travel with the team on Saturday to Boston and stay behind for the birth of his baby, and then join the team later that night after his baby was born and playing the game on Sunday. So his baby was born on Saturday afternoon, and then he elected to decline to follow up on his word and come join the team either Saturday or Sunday, and he skipped the game. And the player was docked his game check for that game. And that became a national story called Babygate there was editorials in the New York Times, Connie Chung, all the big reporters saying that the Houston Oilers must be against fatherhood because they were docking this player who missed a game because of the birth of his baby, a game check. And, the reality was he could have easily come and joined the team after the birth of his baby, as the plan was. And the team elected to not fine him. They just didn't give him his game check. People didn't realize then, and I think still now, a player doesn't get his salary on weekly installments. There's 16 games in the season. Every time he gets a check, it's 1/16 of his check. So you don't play in that game, you don't get paid. So he wasn't fined. He just didn't get paid for the game that he didn't play in. Just like if Elton John shows up for a concert or doesn't show up for a concert, he doesn't get paid because he didn't perform. But that season, having all those 3 things happen and we were in the national spotlight constantly for bad things. And to navigate each one of those incidents and try to figure out how we can come out of the tunnel on these things was tough. And I'm proud that we were able to do that.
You speak about navigating through these obstacles. If there was a how-to manual for how you, Chip, go about crisis control and handling that, what are they? What are your bullet points that you will always adhere to during situations like that?
Well, first and foremost, and this seems like such an obvious one, but it's amazing how much, people choose to not take this path. It's you've got to be on, you've got to be honest. Now, you may not always tell the media or whomever everything that you know, but you've got to be truthful, because if you lose your credibility, especially if you're in a position where you're the spokesman for a team and you have a flock of media covering you on a daily basis, if you're not honest with them, if they don't feel that the information they give you, you give them is trustworthy, you don't have anything, because you're going to be in a situation where you can't be trusted and where you're not believable. And you can't do your organization service if you're not a trusted spokesman. So, you've got to be honest. You have to be prompt in how you deal with issues that come up. You've got to have a game plan. Coaches have a playbook on what to do on Sundays. By the same token, PR people have a playbook on, what are you going to do if, a player gets arrested? What are you going to do if a player suffers a catastrophic injury? Any of those situations. I mean, any PR guy working for a team, you've gotten those calls at 3:00 in the morning telling you that one of your players has been arrested or something bad has happened. And, you've got to be prepared on how you're going to address that. And you've also got to be the point person with your organization and getting people on the same page and letting them know what they need to do to react and make sure that everybody is on the same organizational page.
Yeah, that's so well said. And with all of your experience, you have won the Pete Rozelle Award, which was given to the NFL's top public relations executive, and the way you handle things, certainly you just are so deserving of awards like that. I wanted to leave you with this, and Chip Namias is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. When you look at all of your Super Bowl experiences and what you've been able to do, what is the one moment that even you get a little bit starstruck?
Super Bowl experiences. Well, I've been fortunate, really fortunate, to work at 37 Super Bowls,
Wow.
two of which were with teams that I was the PR guy for, the Dolphins, when we went to the Super Bowl in 82 and 84. Probably the moment that you would be referring to was not a good moment. It was a starstruck moment, but it was a Super Bowl. I think it was the year of Deflategate. And my post-game responsibility was to get Bill Belichick coming off the field before all the hubbub and get some quick comments from him for a lot of the media that were on deadline. And I followed him around, and his PR guy told him that I was going to be doing that as a representative of the NFL. And at that time, Bill was not too happy with the NFL because of the way the Deflategate investigation was going. And a short version of the story is I walked around with him on the field. He ignored me. He went over to the trophy presentation. He ignored me. He went into the locker room, was walking to the locker room to change his shirt because it was soaked with Gatorade. He was ignoring me. Finally, I go in the locker room. All the players are still on the field celebrating. He's going in to change his sticky shirt from Gatorade bath. And he walks in the locker room and I follow him in there. And it's a cavernous locker room and there's no one else in there except Bill Belichick and me. And he walks to the far end of the locker room after he changes his shirt to get a Gatorade. And I'm thinking, this is my last chance to get him to give me those quotes that the NFL needs to distribute to the media. And now he can't ignore me. There's nobody else around. And I go over to him and he turns around and he says, "You're from the NFL, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I have nothing to say to anybody who's representing the NFL. The way that the Deflategate has been handled, I don't have anything to say. I know you're just trying to do your job, but I'm not talking to you. He said it in a little stronger language than
Yeah.
that, but okay. So I just walked away and went back and wasn't able to get my responsibility done of getting the quotes from Coach Belichick. It didn't happen.
Well, you've gotten a lot done. You've had a lot happen, and I encourage everybody to check out all the great work you're doing with athlete and event sports public relations. Chip Namias is certainly one of the great people in the business of sports media, entertainment, and beyond. His Rolodex is as large as a Yellow Pages. I don't know if the Gen Z people even know what a Yellow Pages is, but Chip, it has been so much fun. I'm so grateful for these stories. I know a lot of people will enjoy them. So appreciative of your time. Thank you so much. I'm Bryan Fenley.
Thanks, Brian.